Hello, pilots and pacifists. My name is TBSkyne, and welcome to Ring of Red, an early 2000s Konami title that was released on PS2 and Xbox 360, and then just kind of vanished. Like, it was released, it didn't sell very well, it didn't get much of a marketing push, it didn't have a lot of hype, and it was sort of just never heard from again. And it's never had an HD remaster or a re-release or a port or any digital releases that I am aware of at all. It's a game that happened and then never went anywhere. And it's not a game a lot of people have played, like, because it sold very poorly and didn't get a lot of marketing, but also because there just weren't that many of them made. I found my copy sometime back in 2005, 6, something like that, in a bargain bin in the used game section of GameStop. It was incredibly dirt cheap, and I just picked it up because, hey, it's what I can afford. And took it home, and I expected, like, to have maybe 10 minutes of fun with it or something. Like, maybe it's just probably just going to be a garbage game with an interesting aesthetic or something. No, this is actually really very good, and I'm very fond of it. I believe this is one of the true hidden gems of the PS2 era, and I think it's a real pity that more people don't know about it and appreciate this game for what it is and what it tried to do. So, as you saw in the intro sequence, this takes place in an alternate history 1960s Japan, the middle of the Cold War, basically, where rather than surrendering after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, Japan resisted and was invaded in a land invasion by both the Soviet Union and the United States, which led to a division of the country, similar to Korea and Vietnam, into a communist north and a democratically aligned South, which of course immediately led to a massive and painful civil war. And it's in the aftermath of that the game takes place. Now, a lot of the alternate history stuff that goes on in this game is sort of an extended justification for why this game is full of mechs. Like, we're in the 1960s, we're in, like, Dieselpunk times, and instead of tanks, this is what you use on the battlefield. And, you know, it's sometimes a little flimsy for a justification, but it's actually very well realized, honestly. And the story of the game concerns itself largely with, like, what happens when you split a country in two across ideological lines. What happens to families? What happens to the various people who live there? What happens to people who have, like, grown up with war and who have never known anything but war? What does that do to their psychology? What kind of behavior do they end up engaging in when that's the environment that they grow up in? And in that sense, the story is actually really quite interesting. But the meat of the game is what you're seeing in front of you right now. It's the combat encounters. It's a tactical RPG, which means you have an overworld map where you move your units around, you move them next to each other, like attack, defend, heal each other, yada, yada, yada. But when you move units into range of enemy units, unlike a lot of RPGs where tactical RPGs was like you select the attack command and then some damage happens and then it's the next unit's turn. Here you enter an actual combat scenario, as you can see here, where you're piloting your mech and you're attempting to do as much damage to the enemy unit as possible before getting the heck out of dodge. Which makes this a much more active tactical RPG than a lot of other ones, because even if you set everything up advantageously on the world map, like you have your units surrounding the enemy, and like you have better squads and you have better soldiers and stuff like that, if you screw it up in the combat encounter, you can still get completely killed. And similarly, even if the enemy has you dead to rights, like they've multiple people surrounding you, so long as you manage the combat encounters correctly, you can still come out on top, which is exhilarating. Like, it makes it a really fun tactical experience, because on the one hand, you're planning in terms of just thinking about the stats and who has the best numbers and stuff like that, but on the other hand, you're also thinking about, okay, can I pilot this thing well enough? Can I make the right tactical decisions in a combat encounter to be able to survive under circumstances where I otherwise would never be able to get out ahead? So, there's 4 different types of mechs in the game. You've got your light AFWs, which is the one that's attacking me right now. They are usually 2-legged, they can only shoot, and they generally prefer to fight up close, and generally don't do a lot of damage to enemy mechs, and they generally have sort of very limited abilities, but they're light, they're fast, they are really good at dodging enemy shots, and they're sort of the hit-and-run scout units of the game. Then you have your standard AFW, which is the big mech thing that I'm piloting right now, which is sort of your all-rounder. It can do pretty much everything. It can do close combat, it can do, you know, combat from range. It's pretty good at just most things, but not extremely good at anything. And they're sort of the workhorses. Then you've got your 4-legged AFWs, which we might see a little bit more of later, which are essentially, like, they're the closest thing you have to actual, like, tanks or artillery in this game. 4-legged AFWs have massive cannons on them. They work almost exclusively effective at range, like long range. They can't fight up close. And they're really slow to fire, but they do a ton of damage with each shot. You know, that kind of thing. And the fourth type is one that's not on the battlefield in this particular mission, but it's called the anti-AFW. It's a mech that's designed exclusively to kill other mechs in close combat. And they are extremely powerful and dangerous up close, but if you get them at long range or you turn the fight into an extended combat encounter, they get screwed over completely. Like, they don't even stand the least bit of a chance. So there's this rock, paper, scissors system, except with 4 or 5 more variables in it, where something counters one thing, but is countered by another thing, and you constantly kind of have to evaluate, like, what your situation is. Can I counter the thing that this guy is doing? And that extends down to the squads of soldiers as well. Each mech comes with 3 squads of soldiers. One of them is the crew, which means they're responsible for reloading the gun and sort of taking care of the mech, repairing it, and they are safe during combat. They're piloting the mech, they can't be harmed. But they also can't do any direct damage to the enemy. Then you've got the 2 ground squads, which are, they can be in the vanguard, which is up front, where they can attack, or they can be in the rear guard, where they can only really defend themselves from things. They have special abilities as well. Some of them work up front, some of them work in the back. They have stats, they have things that they are effective and not very effective against. This guy, for example, I have specialized him in taking down enemy mechs. So he's got 2 squads of shooters with him, which are soldiers with bazookas who can only fire at the enemy mech. They can't really do anything. It's literally the only thing they do. As a trade-off, they're really, 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 really weak to anti-soldier fire. Like, if the enemy has a bunch of soldiers on the field who are effective against enemy soldiers, they get torn to shreds. So there's this push and pull of, I can put them forward to attack the enemy, but that also entails the risk that they're going to be cut to shreds, and when a squad of soldiers die, they're gone forever. Like, that's permadeath in this game. And so you have to, there's that tactical push and pull of, when do I put them forward, when do I put them back? And of course, putting them forward takes a certain amount of time in-game, and pulling them back takes a certain amount of time. And you constantly have to manage that tension, because as you can see at the top of the screen right now, there's a timer ticking down, which is the max amount of time you have for each combat encounter. You only have about 60 seconds of actual action happening, with time slowing down or stopping when you use abilities or when you give out commands. So, if something takes like 5 seconds to do, like pulling your squads forward, then you have to manage, okay, if I put them forward now, how much can they attack before I have to pull them back? How long does that take? Is it worth it to put them forward right now? Can they do enough damage before the combat encounter is over in return for the damage that they're inevitably going to take from the enemy? And there's so much consideration, like there's so much complexity in the systems at play here. That just makes it a wonderful tactical experience. Like, it's way more hardcore than your Final Fantasy Tactics. Like, it's way more hardcore than your Disgaeas and stuff like that, in terms of just the amount of tactical consideration you have to make about how you use your resources. This is a fairly early level, which means I'm not having that much... This guy's being surrounded by 3 dudes. He's gonna take some damage, but I know he's not really gonna be in trouble because I know how to play the game and stuff. But later on, like the later missions, enemies will have tons of special abilities. They will have incredibly effective soldier squads. They'll have a lot of armor, and it's really a puzzle to figure out how to correctly manage the RNG and the risk and the tactics of the game in order to figure out how to win each mission. Like, it gets really, really tough. And that's something I love, is that it is a very hard game at the later levels if you don't know what you're doing. It's also got a fantastic aesthetic. Like, I love the aesthetic of this video game. It's that Dieselpunk ridiculous, where each of the mechs, like, they are designed such that they don't look slick, they don't look cool, they don't look futuristic, they look like they were made in the 1960s with the best technology available. So they're full of, like, diesel and gasoline engines and, like, smokestacks billowing out smoke and sounds of engines going... Like, really that lo-fi... grimy aesthetic to them. Like, that really looks like this stuff is being held together with grease and duct tape sometimes, and, you know, field repairs and stuff, which I really adore. Like, I really love how hard it goes in on that, and that extends to a lot of the concept art and the character art in the games, which is just absolutely lovely. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's got a lot of wonderful character art. Now, it's all rendered, of course, in PS2 style polygon models, which are not super pretty, but the character portraits and, like, the expressiveness and the detail that's going on with everything in this game is just, for the era, absolutely excellent. And this is a game I've sunk so many hours into. Like, I've spent so long playing this damn video game, and it still kicks my ass sometime. And it's a real gem. Like, it's not... Like, it has its downsides. Like, for one thing, because everything is like sort of Dieselpunk and committed to the aesthetic of, oh, these are not slick, super fast mechs or anything. These are just hunks of steel on two legs that are kind of being powered by a gasoline engine. Everything moves slowly. Everything moves with a lot of weight. It's ponderous, which means it's slow. Like, it's a game that takes a long time to play. Things take a long time to happen. During combat encounters, like, there's always, this animation has to play out, these guys are using their abilities. Like, so it can be kind of a slog sometimes, especially if you're losing. Then it can feel like really just kind of insult to injury that you have to watch yourself lose as slowly as you do. It's also doesn't have the best translation in the world. Both in, like, terms of the dialogue, where, like, there's a lot of idioms and a lot of phrases and you know, dialogue exchanges that would mean a lot, like, make a lot more sense in traditional Japanese, but which haven't been translated very well to English, so the characters seem kind of wooden and don't really seem like their emotions and their personality don't really come across very well always. And similarly also with a lot of the text in-game, you can see, for instance, yeah, like all the abbreviations that show up all the time, NJ Army, and sometimes you get RD for road, and a lot of places where text is supposed to go that are big enough for all the Japanese text to fit in it, but not big enough for the English text, and that's when you get situations where things have to be abbreviated in really unhelpful ways, and sometimes the menus can be kind of a pain to navigate because of it. It can be kind of hard to find your way around. It's also not very well optimized. Like, even for a PS2 era game, this thing gets pretty choppy. Like, there's a lot of slowdown. There's a lot of, like, of the game simply not being able to keep up with, like, the hardware not being able to keep up with what the game wants to do, which makes the game even slower. And so, like, there's a lot of annoyances. There's a lot of lack of polish, which partly explains why this game never really got very big, because it's not slick at all. It's an intensely flawed video game that a lot of people probably aren't gonna have that much fun with, ultimately. Because it's a niche thing, it's a limited thing. If you have the patience for it, it's an absolute beauty. It's an absolute wonderful gem from the PS2 era. But if you don't, if you want something that's a bit faster, that's a bit more accessible, and, you know, maybe it's not for you, and it's a real pity. Like, I have wanted so badly to see an art book released from this game, just to see the concept art that underlies what goes on in this video game, because it's so damn, like, the cutscenes and stuff is so damn gorgeously rendered with the artwork that they use. And I have wanted to just see a sequel or a reboot or a remaster or anything from this so badly, because it's such a unique premise, it's such a unique style of it. It's a World War II, or it's a Cold War era video game, which is already kind of rare, and it's a game about dieselpunk mechs fighting on the battlefields of a divided Japan, like that was occupied by the Soviets. Like, what does that even mean in the context of Japanese history? Those are really interesting questions that I wish video games would actually bother to ask more. Where so many alternate histories are just like, what if the Nazis had won? Not a lot of them are about, well, what if not so much the Nazis had won, but what if the Japanese Empire was divided between, you know, the Soviet and the American spheres? That's a fascinating alternate history question that, as a historian, it kind of whets my appetite. As you can probably tell, I'm kind of rambling a little bit here, because it's just, I find it hard to communicate what I love about this game so much without just kind of either going on a 40-minute explanation of every facet of the combat system, which is so complicated by the end of the game. It's lovely. Or by just going in an extended philosophical ramble about, oh, what could it possibly mean in terms of the historical implications and so on. But it's just really nice. It's just a really nice game that I recommend people play. And I wanted to make a video about it for no other reason except that. So if you want to play it, you might be kind of out of luck a little bit. Like, if you can find a PS2 or an Xbox 360 copy out there, then, you know, you can use those, and certainly there are emulators available that will allow you to play something like that on your PC if need be. But besides that, like, it's getting really hard to find these days. It's not a game that's well archived, again, because not a lot of people played it, because it wasn't really very popular or anything. There just aren't that many copies of it out there. I think you can find it on eBay, maybe on Amazon, used if you're lucky. It's certainly worth picking up. If you have a PS2 lying around somewhere, or, Lord forbid, a PS3 that's PS2 compatible, which I do. I have a PS2 like that. It's a tiny little garbage model that was like the first one they ever put out. then it's definitely worth picking up and it's definitely worth checking out. But, otherwise, just kind of be aware of it. When Konami, for some, decide not to be like the worst gaming company on earth after Activision, Blizzard, and EA anymore, when they ask you what franchise they want to bring back, do me a favor and say Ring of Red. Just make people remember that this thing exists, and maybe we can get a sequel someday, because I adore this game to bits. Hey, thank you very much for watching this little retrospective, I guess, on Ring of Red, one of my favorite games from the early PS2 era. I didn't really have a script for this one. I just sat down and rambled about a game that I really, really enjoy, that I really, really like, because I think more people should know about it. So, I encourage you, if you can, to find it, pick it up, play it for yourself, and see why it's such an underappreciated gem. But of course, like, comment, subscribe, YouTube stuff, yada, yada, yada. If you want to support this channel and the work that I do, then there's Patreon for that specific purpose. As I say at the end of my videos, $1 on a Patreon, or even just as a one-time tip, is worth like 1,000 to maybe 2,000 views to a YouTuber. So if you want to support me or any other YouTuber that you know, that's absolutely the best way. Is even $1 makes a big difference for us. If you don't want to do that, or you can't do that, well, then of course that's completely okay. I'm just happy that you watched the video this far. If you have not enjoyed this video, well, I don't blame you, because it's like a video about a really obscure video game that nobody cares about, and then there's a dislike button down below for your convenience. Unfortunately, due to a severe political conflict between the comments section and the video section of YouTube, the dislike button is currently placed in the neutral demilitarized zone of the YouTube channel. If you would like to access the dislike button, please apply for a diplomatic visa to tour the demilitarized zone, as well as a planning permission from both the North and South YouTube governments in order to be able to touch and operate the dislike button on neutral diplomatic grounds. This process may take anywhere between 3 months and 6 years before your application is granted, and we do require that you are affiliated with a UN-recognized NGO in order to be able to access the demilitarized zone under a diplomatic protection. Thank you very much for watching.